Hello, welcome to another episode of Art History School. My name is Paul Priestley and today I'm going to be looking at Egon Schiele, one of my favourite artists. Don't expect traditional beauty or sumptuous still lives. This artist explores the human existence, mankind's pure being with no frills. Figure studies and self-portraits predominate, drawn and painted in a uniquely expressive and dramatic fashion. I think it's brilliant. Let's see what you think. Egon Leo Adolf Schiele was born on the 12th of June 1890 in an apartment in the station house of Tulln, a small town northwest of Vienna. He was the third of four children born to Adolf Schiele, an upper-level station master for the Austrian State Railway, and Maria Sukup, originally from Krumau in southern Bohemia. The couple had apparently been betrothed since Maria was 12 years old, and they were married when she was just 17. Schille's early years were marked by both great affection and tragedy when his eldest sister Elvira died at the age of 10 in 1893 of meningitis. The loss deeply affected the family, resulting in Schiele developing a particularly close bond with his younger sister Gertrude, or Gertie as she was known, who later became one of his models. His formal education began in Tulln, but was soon disrupted by his father's declining health. He was suffering from syphilis. In 1901, to prepare Schiele for university, he was sent to the grammar school in Krems, about 25 miles from Tulln, where he boarded with a very unsympathetic widow. His academic performance was poor, and after a short period he returned home. Despite his low academic achievement, Schiele exhibited a prodigious talent for drawing. His passion was drawing trains. In fact, Schiele was so obsessed by trains that he drew them constantly from his room overlooking the station where his father worked. He would often run through the apartment making train noises, and on one occasion filled his room with chains of hand-drawn train carriages. As a result of this fascination, his parents were convinced that one day he would become a railway engineer like his grandfather. In 1902, Schiele was sent to another grammar school, this time in Klosterneuburg, which was closer to Tulln, but again he had to board with strangers and there was still no improvement in his academic work. Later that year, Schille's father's syphilis entered its final stages and he was pensioned off from his job for being mentally unstable. 2 years later, Schiele, together with his parents, visited Krumau, his mother's birthplace, but shortly after arriving his father tried to jump from a window into the river Moldau, but luckily he was stopped. Adolf Schiele died on New Year's Eve 1904, but the family reported his death as occurring on the 1st of January 1905 so they could earn an extra year's pension. Following the death, the family's financial circumstances declined dramatically, and as a result, Schiele and Gertie became wards of their uncle, Leopold Ciekacek, a railway official in Vienna. Academically, Schiele had fallen behind most of his classmates and subsequently failed the spring term at the Klosterneuburg Grammar School. As a result, Schille's mother was politely asked to remove him from the school. Later that year, against strong protests from his uncle, Schiele took the rigorous entrance exam for Vienna's Academy of Fine Arts and passed with flying colours. So in the autumn of 1906, at the age of 16, Schiele enrolled at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, becoming one of its youngest students. He studied under Christian Griepenkerl, a traditionalist painter known for his historical works. However, Schiele soon grew disillusioned with the Academy's conservative approach, Griepenkerl's rigid teaching methods and the stifling curriculum, so he began to look for inspiration elsewhere. That inspiration came when a pivotal meeting happened in 1907, and that would prove instrumental in Schille's development. He met Gustav Klimt, the leading figure of the Vienna Secession movement. Klimt immediately recognised Schiller's talent and became his mentor, introducing him to potential patrons, models, and to the works of contemporary artists such as Vincent van Gogh, Edvard Munch and Jan Toorop. Through Klimt, Schiller also became acquainted with the Wiener Werkstatt, an arts and crafts workshop associated with the Secession. As a result of the association with Klimt, a number of Schiller's early works show similarities to Klimt's. For instance, the pose that he used in this painting, Cardinal and Nun, also known as the Caress, which mirrors that of Klimt's iconic The Kiss. In 1908, Schiller participated in his first exhibition at Klosterneuburg. The following year, still frustrated with the Academy's rigidity, he and a group of like-minded students, including Oskar Kokoschka and Max Oppenheimer, left to form the Neue Kunstgruppe, the New Art Group. It advocated a more progressive, expressive approach to painting, more in line with the ideas of the Viennese avant-garde art scene. This period marked the foundation of the development of his own distinctive way of drawing and painting. The New Art Group had their first exhibition at the Piscol Gallery in Vienna in December 1909. Not only did this mark the beginning of Schiller's professional career, it was also where he met Arthur Rosler, the art critic and art historian. He championed Schiller and became his quasi-business manager and supporter. He was the first to promote and defend Schiller's work in articles for Arbeiter Zeitung and helped with portrait commissions through introductions he made to early patrons such as Heinrich Beneš and Oskar Reichel. In 1910, Schiller moved to Krumau in a bid to escape the artistic rivalries he experienced in Vienna. There he often worked with Erwin Olsen, an eccentric stage set painter, and he also began to write poetry. His painting and drawing continued to develop, characterized by an expressive line, distorted forms, and a focus on the human figure. He was moving away from the decorative elegance of Klimt's work to embrace a raw, more emotionally charged aesthetic. His subjects often included erotic nudes, self-portraits and allegorical themes which reflected his own introspection. But his controversial approach was also influenced by the sickness, insanity and death of his father, which had had a profound effect on him. It is not surprising, therefore, that around this time his work focused on death and decay. As he wrote in 1910, "Everything is living dead." In 1911, Schiller met Walburga Neusel, known as Wally, a 17-year-old girl who had previously modelled for Gustav Klimt. Wally became Schiller's muse and companion, appearing in many of his works, but their unconventional lifestyle and Schiller's use of local teenage girls as models led to a community backlash, forcing them to relocate to Neulengbach, a town west of Vienna. In 1912, Schiller's life took a dramatic turn when he was arrested on the 13th of April in Neulengbach on charges of seducing a minor and producing pornographic drawings. This was after locals had complained that he was living with a woman who was not his wife and that he had invited local children to pose for him. Consequently, police constables searched his studio looking for evidence of immorality and confiscated a number of drawings. Schiller was taken to the local jail where he was confined for 21 days, but was not told what the charges were. In fact, he didn't find out until his trial. At the trial, the police presented 100 of his drawings as evidence and the judge took one of them and flamboyantly burnt it in front of Schiller before sentencing him to a further 3 days confinement. The more serious charge of abusing children was dropped. Throughout his imprisonment, Wally remained loyal and delivered food and art supplies to him daily. During this time, Schiller created a series of poignant works reflecting his confinement and the experience left a lasting impact on his psyche and his art. After his release, the couple had a few days in short-term accommodation before they returned to Vienna and rented a studio in the Herzinger Hauptstrasse. He would use this studio for the rest of his life. Despite the scandal of the imprisonment, Schille's career continued to rise. In 1913, he held his first solo exhibition at the Gallery Hans Goltz in Munich, followed by a show in Paris in 1914. His work began to attract the attention of a wider audience for its intensity and originality. This helped solidify his reputation within the Expressionist movement, but his financial situation was still precarious. This was partly due to his original supporters, Rosler and Benesch, losing interest in supporting him because of his constant requests for money and the fact that he, in their opinion, charged too much for his paintings. In 1914, in November, his sister Gertie married Anton Peschke and gave birth just a month afterwards. This prompted Schiele to start thinking about marrying, which resulted in him starting a strong flirtation with two sisters, Edith and Adele Harms, who lived across the street from his studio. In 1915, Schille's craving for a more settled, steady life intensified and eventually led him to make the significant decision to marry Edith Harms, which he did on the 17th of June of that year. Edith was from a respectable middle-class family, which was the lifestyle he hoped to aspire to. However, this choice led to the end of his relationship with Valley. She left him after learning of his engagement and having refused his offer of a promise to spend several weeks every summer with her on holiday. His utopian dream of an untroubled existence with both women may be suggested by several works he created around this time depicting women locked in erotic embraces was over. Schiele never saw Valley again. She died 2 years later of scarlet fever whilst working as a nurse in Split, in what is now Croatia. The emotional turmoil of this period is suggested in his painting Death and the Maiden of 1915. The two figures in the painting are recognisably Schiele and Valley. You can see in the work a sense of intimacy and remoteness in the gestures and the expression of the finality and hopelessness of a love draining away. The end of the relationship with Valley is perhaps summed up when we look at Schille's face with its fixed, unseeing gaze from an eye that looks abnormally large. It's a gaze that knows the inevitability of the trauma and knowledge of what is to come. Just 3 days after his marriage to Edith Harms, Schiele was conscripted into the Austro-Hungarian army. The First World War had been raging for nearly a year, and although he never saw active service, his first assignment was spent digging trenches and guarding and escorting Russian prisoners, who he started to use as subjects for his drawings. He soon began to identify with the prisoners' plight and concluded that war was pointlessly cruel. In 1916 he was transferred to a prisoner of war camp at Möhling, which was not in the war zone. Edith was permitted to join him. She lived in a hotel while he bunked with other conscripts. His commanding officer even gave him a disused storeroom to use as a studio. Even though he had not fought on the front lines, his wartime experiences did influence his work, and his palette around this time became more subdued, and he began to focus more on themes of mortality and transience. For a period after the marriage, Edith was Schille's only model, but his style was changing, becoming more naturalistic, less controversial and more mature, perhaps a reflection of the tenderness and intimacy he shared with Edith. But as time went by, Edith's body was no longer as lean and fragile as it had once been. So Schiele began asking his sister Adele to model for him. Adele later claimed that the relationship with Schiele wasn't perhaps as virtuous as it should have been. In January 1917, under the sponsorship of a sympathetic young art dealer, Kurt Grunwald, Schiele was transferred to the military supply depot in Vienna. Its duties were relatively light, and his commanding officer, Hans Rose, gave him plenty of creative leeway. As a result, despite wartime restrictions, Schille's career began to take off. In July 1917, a portfolio of his work was published, and he also organised the War Exhibition, in which he took part and which eventually toured Holland, Sweden and Denmark. Following the death of Gustav Klimt in February 1918, Schiele became Austria's leading artistic light, and later in March at the 49th exhibition of the Vienna Secession, Schiele had 50 works displayed in the main hall and sold most of them. He continued to busy himself organising exhibitions at home and abroad, and maintained a full calendar of portrait sittings and modelling appointments. And for the first time in his life, he could afford to pay for a range of professional models. At the end of April 1918, he managed to get himself transferred to the Army Museum in Vienna, where he was given almost free rein to pursue his artistic activities in whatever way he wished. With his increasing financial success, he decided to rent a larger studio on the Wachtmanngasse in Vienna, but he also kept his old studio because he had plans of establishing an art school there. But the new studio proved difficult to heat, and by the autumn the war had created desperate food and fuel shortages in Vienna. The Spanish flu pandemic, which would eventually kill more than 20 million people, more than were killed in the fighting during the First World War, finally reached Vienna. At the beginning of October 1918, Edith, who was 6 months pregnant, contracted Spanish flu and died later that month on the 28th. Schiele, who was already ill, died just 3 days later. In those desperate days between their deaths, Schiele captured the depth of his grief in several poignant sketches that he made of his wife. Schiele was just 28 years old when he died, yet his impact on the world of art has been enduring. His exploration of human emotions, sexuality and mortality, conveyed through a distinctive and expressive style, has influenced generations of artists. Schiele was a visionary who, in his brief life, pushed the boundaries of artistic expression and left an indelible mark on the history of art. Thank you for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, perhaps you might like to buy me a coffee. You can do so by clicking the little thanks button just below the screen here. That would be very much appreciated. I look forward to seeing you again in the next video. Until then, goodbye!